Welcome everyone to a conversation with Kate Swaffer. My name is Emma Smith. I'm the project manager with Age UK Salford on a project called Empowered Conversations. Kate, thank you so much for giving your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you haven't been to one of these webinars before, as I said, I work on a project called Empowered Conversations, and we deliver communication courses for family caregivers across Greater Manchester in the UK. And we also offer one-to-one dementia-specific therapeutic sessions within Salford. So that's who we are. So format today is that Kate is going to do her presentation, and then we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So at the bottom of your screen, we've all been using chat. If at any point you have a question for Kate, if you write it in the Q&A, and then it just makes it easy for us to find, write it in the Q&A, and then at the end of Kate's chat, we're going to pick up the questions and we're going to widen up the discussion with us all. So I hope that feels okay. How do you want a copy of the transcript? Oh,
why not? Yes, please.
That would be brilliant. I do a very convoluted way. I upload it onto YouTube and then I get a transcript from there, but that would be amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I think we're ready to get going then, Kate, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, fantastic. So I shall share my screen now. Yep. I just need to hide that because otherwise I can't see. So thanks for the invitation to come back, Emma. And I'm going to talk about dementia and stigma, mostly probably barriers and reasons for stigma, and a few opportunities at the end. So thanks again for having me. I first wish to acknowledge the land that I work and am lucky enough to live on. I live on the traditional country of the Kaurna people, the Indigenous Australians whose lands are the Adelaide Plains, and I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and any other Aboriginal persons from other states of people attending today. I recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, and acknowledge they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. I also recognise that their sovereignty over this land was never ceded. So stigma is an interesting topic, and when I first started my PhD, my topic was dementia and stigma. And I think what I found that was after 40 years of advocacy and research into that topic, it's still really pervasive. And I decided not to continue with that as a topic for I've just gone back to my PhD, and so I changed topics because I feel like everything we've done so far on trying to change stigma hasn't worked. So just to start off actually with my personal experience of stigma and dementia. So dementia introduced me to multiple forms of stigma and new discriminations and other rights violations that I'd never experienced. Of course, I'd experienced the differences in economic status and a whole range of things of being a female and sometimes of being a shorter female. But it was really these things that I was already experiencing as a woman were heightened due to the diagnosis of dementia. There seems to be a parallel with the stigma of mental illness, and I think that's because many people still believe that dementia is a mental illness, simply because some of the disabilities are cognitive in nature. I've got what's mostly seen as an older person's condition. And, I guess 90% of people with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia are older, but there are younger people with it. So I've experienced ageism. I've experienced ableism, massive amounts of economic stigma and discrimination. I've had to self-fund a lot of my own disability support simply to ensure inclusion. And I still see that current inclusion is still really exclusive in many ways, and it's highly selective, and it's certainly not, in my eyes, equitable yet. So stigma is a set of negative and unfair beliefs that a society, or on the topic of what we're talking about, people with dementia, are experiencing a mark of shame or discredit. And when you look up the synonyms of stigma, you can see why it's so difficult to live with. When I was first studying about stigma, in fact, I wrote an article a few years ago that was published in the Dementia Journal about stigma and language and dementia friendly, which I'd like to rewrite actually, because I don't believe in dementia friendly initiatives anymore. But the study was really galvanized by Irvin Goffman. He defined it as reducing the person from a whole and usual person to a tainted or discounted one, a spoiled identity. And then other researchers emphasised another key element of stigma is power. And in the case of people with dementia, certainly the loss of power. So we become powerless once we have dementia. Multiple causes of stigma, and Goffman noted that it enables varieties of discrimination that deny an individual or a group. So 57 million people with dementia, it's denying them full social acceptance. It's reduced our opportunities significantly. It's fueled social inequalities, and it's definitely, dementia's definitely increased and caused violations of the rights of people with dementia. And the Royal Commission into Quality and Safety in Aged Care in Australia proved that it's happening in Australia, and multiple reports, there's evidence of that globally. So it's associated with a whole range of different things, race, religion, people with dementia. Many of the people with dementia that I've talked to we talk about self-stigma and shame. And I certainly felt very ashamed when I was first diagnosed with dementia. And then, putting my nurse's hat on, why would I feel ashamed of a brain condition? I didn't feel ashamed of any other health conditions. And certainly economic stigma has been one of my biggest battles, I think, since I've been involved in dementia land. So there are a lot of cultural differences. Many people say to me, oh, it's so much better in Australia than it is, for example, in African countries where people with dementia are seen to have been taken over by evil spirits or a form of witchcraft. But I think that it's not a competition about who's got worse stigma or whether it's better anywhere. I think that these differences just highlight different reasons for stigma. So, I've got friends in Kenya, for example, and they can't believe that white Australians would feel any stigma at all about a condition called dementia, when we don't see dementia as witchcraft or an evil spirit. But certainly a lot of Dementia Alliance International members have been asked to leave their churches, for example, in developed countries such as Australia and the USA. DAI started running a Christmas spiritual service because people were being kicked out of their churches, saying that they'd obviously become sinners to have got dementia. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a BAME community or you're from the LGBTIQA plus community. And then there are the generational differences. I certainly felt stigma because of dementia, but nothing like my parents felt about stigma. My father felt like I'd brought shame on our family simply by being public about having a diagnosis of dementia. So I think it's interesting to note that, everyone feels it, but for different reasons and differently. So stigmas contribute to the rights violations of people with dementia. And I won't go through all of those. I probably went through them the last time I spoke, but the lack of quality care, the lack of being told dementia causes disabilities, and the amount of physical and chemical restraint that people with dementia experience is a global problem. And I think that stigma has contributed to it. The harmful effects of stigma, and I was reading some of the reports, some of the journal articles for this from the Stride project, and stigma it causes a global barrier to seeking a diagnosis or to seek help or even treatment. There's a loss of autonomy, self-determination and agency caused by stigma. And I think the other interesting thing came out in London at the ADI conference last year. Stigma and negative language has really, is a very high impact on stopping people being willing to get involved in research. But it also has a negative impact on lifespan or longevity, feelings of shame, hopelessness, isolation. And I think that others believe we'll never succeed, but our self-stigma often means we don't think we can either. So stigma leads to discrimination or increases discrimination. And it could be obvious and direct, it might be unintentional and more subtle. But I think that stigma has been reinforced by the use of the paradigm behavioural and psychological symptoms of dementia. And that's not the topic for today, but I think that has been a lot to do with why we've been labelled as having challenging behaviours from a condition that's caused a lot of unpleasant experiences that haven't been well managed or supported. So we need to bust the myths because they contribute to stigma. And I do have a feeling that I went through this last time, so I won't repeat myself. But people with dementia, if we keep reading about them as victims and sufferers, then there's a real belief in the community and especially in the media that we can't live positively with dementia. And I was reading an article in either the Washington Post or the New York Times, a journalist saying, you know, it's such a new thing, people are living positively with dementia. And, you know, I know Christine Bryden well, and she was diagnosed in the last century, and she's still living reasonably positively with dementia. So it's not such a new thing that people can live positively with dementia. So we need to bust those myths to help combat some of the stigma and the attitudes towards people with dementia. So I think stigma has also contributed to healthcare professionals, organisations and researchers ignoring that dementia is a cause of disability in post-diagnostic pathways and a denial of disability support in the workplace. Not to support dementia as a condition causing disabilities is, from my view, a rights violation. Universities can provide disability support for everybody. The healthcare sector should be able to do the same. And the last, I think, 3, 4 or 5 World Alzheimer's reports published by Alzheimer's Disease International and other research projects such as Cognizance have proven in the last 4 to 5 years, they've just confirmed that almost nothing has changed. And I guess that's why I've been trying to find a different way to advocate for change or to do a new research project that might bring about change, because most of those things have not changed from when I was first diagnosed, which is 15 years ago in May. So stigma, just a visual of stigma, and I think prescribed disengagement, which is a term that I trademarked, but I think it leads to or is due to stigma. So I think it's being told there's nothing we can do for you, being advised to go home and prepare to die, and that's it, does lead to all sorts of violations of rights and to increase stigma, and to a lack of equity. So I think it also contributes to the belief that detention and segregation, or i.e. the nicer names for those are nursing homes and secure memory units, stigma's helped us believe that it's okay, that it's acceptable. And these are places that I consider to be places of detention that should be under monitoring from the optional protocol against torture. So I even put dementia villages in that list, and at a law Adelaide Law School event a couple of weeks ago, one of the other speakers also, if it's a gated dementia village, then that it should be deemed as a place of detention. So it's just another form of institutionalization dressed up in different clothing. So opportunities to stop stigma. If my work had offered me reasonable accommodations for the disabilities that have been increasing, yes, it's a progressive chronic terminal condition, but I was diagnosed really early in the disease process. So it's clear that I could still be working, even if I was having to do a different position in my job. Obviously, I couldn't be a regional sales manager driving around 4 states of Australia because of dementia. I lost my driver's license. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't have been offered alternatives in my workplace. We need to stop the paternalistic welfare approach to care, and that might help stop the stigma. Equitable inclusion is not 1 or 2 people representing 57 million or a few people representing 500,000. It can't be. And mostly advocacy is still unpaid. So people need, I think the biggest way to stop the stigma is to start employing people with dementia, stop the slave labour. And I've been doing a lot of reading about slave labour within the disability community, which is where people with dementia fit. And if we weren't prescribed disengagement act diagnosis, those of us in employment probably would have chosen to continue to remain employed, as we would have if we'd had a stroke or a car accident and lost our legs. Employing people in all dementia-friendly initiatives is critical, because if we don't, they're not actually dementia-friendly. They're excluding people with dementia from true equitable involvement in those initiatives. And I really do think that dementia advocacy around the world, and it's growing, there's a growing movement of self-advocates. It proves that with support, many more people could still work. But now, and I've been known to have said this myself, I used to work harder and longer hours in dementia advocacy than I ever was expected to in a paid job. And I think I used to say that with some pride, and I hear other people with dementia saying it with some pride. And actually, it just equates to slave labour. If we have the capacity with support to still contribute in such a significant way, then we should be able to be paid for that work, as we would be before we had dementia. So that was a bit of rocking the boat, really. And I think that only by working together and asking these tough questions, and some of them are really tough questions. You know, we get into self-advocacy because we want to create change for future generations. But when we go back and talk to people like James McKillop from Scotland and Christine Bryden from Queensland, we actually haven't changed very much since they started advocating in the last century. So I think that if we work less in silos and work together more, we might actually create some real change. And maybe if we haven't created change, and I think my last session with you, Emma, was about, you know, 4 decades of advocacy and nothing's changed. Maybe we really do need to rethink the way we move forward, and in an effort to really create tangible change. Another website from another research project is not actually going to help me or most other people with dementia. Lots of people don't even have access to the internet. So how can a website bridge that gap? So really, I think that's all I've got to share today. I found this fabulous. I subscribe to a couple of sites for comics like this and for images. And this comes from a site called Andertunes. And I've often said that I live every day as if it's my last, just in case it is. And so this little joke comic was perfect for me. And, you know, now that it's here, it's pretty anticlimactic. And I think, as Billy Connolly once said in a comedy show, it was in the earlier days when eating 5-grain bread was healthy for you and give you a longer life. And he said something like, I'm going back to white bread, he said, because the 2 weeks of longer life that I'm going to get is at the end of my life when I'm peeing my pants. Who wants that? So I think that takes us through to question time. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for the joke at the end, Kate. Very well delivered. I love Billy Connolly. Okay, so yes, it is question time. So please start popping your questions in the Q&A. I know that Kate was looking forward to quite a lively discussion around some of the points that she's raised. It's really interesting, Kate, that you're talking about slave labor, and I know we did touch on this a little bit last time. When we're getting advocates into a group so that we feel that we're representing people with dementia or caregivers, and we're not paying them, and we're not sort of recognizing their rights to work, then it's wrong. And I don't know if that's changed in Australia. Certainly in the UK, I'm not seeing that people are getting paid for their input at a national level or a local level.
I think there's some new guidelines with Dementia Australia, and I haven't actually looked them up. In the mental health space in Australia, mental health advocates who get involved in consultations with government, or they have 3 levels of payment, and they're very commercially recognised rates. 3 levels. The 3rd level is to put in quotes for real project work. And I've done an enormous amount of project work for free. And, interestingly for me, it was my University of South Australia, who I was attending UniSA when I was diagnosed. And it was the staff there that said to me, but Kate, why do you have to give up work? Why is it that one day you get diagnosed and the next day you can't do anything? That's just not logical. And again, for me, I get paid for the majority of the work that I do with universities now. So universities certainly lead the way, or have led the way for me. And I think we need to take a leaf out of their book. And, we wouldn't tell children with dyslexia not to get an education and not to get a job.
Yeah.
We'd support them. Of course we would.
And I suppose your argument is, if you've got capacity to advocate, then you've got capacity to work with support, and it's around those adjustments that employers can make to keep people in work. So I think we've got so Pam has said, and I guess it depends on where you're at with your dementia, but how do I persuade people to interact with my husband on a social level? He's forgetful and confused, and I have experienced people don't want to mix with him.
Pamela, I wish I knew the answer to that. I go to events and it's more often a dementia event, like a conference that I go to with my husband where this happens. It has happened socially, but less so because, a large proportion of our family and friends kind of walked away. So if you get cancer, everyone comes, it promises to be with you till your last breath. If you get dementia, a significant proportion of people fade away. But my husband's had people come up to him at dementia events where I've been speaking, for example, like I've spoken, for me it's tonight, and they'll whisper to him and say, oh, how's Kate? And he'd go, well, she's just over there. Why don't you go and ask her? They never ask me. So I guess people don't know what to say. And, one of the co-founders of Dementia Alliance International, the late Richard Taylor, it was why we had a hello series of blogs. People used to say to him, and he'd been a psychologist in his professional career, what should I say to people with dementia? And he'd say, why not say hello? It's pretty simple. What would you say to anybody else? So, Pamela, I don't know how to answer that. I don't think I've got any solutions at all for you, other than maybe share more with at least closer family and friends. And I can remember in the earlier days having a nursing friend and her husband come to visit, and she's not married to him anymore, but they stuck by me as friends, and they asked me how I was, and I did the old, oh, I'm fine. We're all our worst sort of agents, if you want to say. If you were selling a house, don't come to me. It's hard to sell yourself, and it's hard to talk about your problems as well. And my girlfriend's husband, Brett, said, "Hey, tell us how you really are." And I said, "Oh, you don't really want to hear that." He said, "Yes, we do. We want to hear how you really are, because if you don't tell us, how can we possibly know how to support you? If you don't tell us how you are and ask for what you want." I suppose if you liken it to a sexual partner, if you don't tell a sexual partner you don't like something or you would like something, well, they're not mind readers. So, and I can remember one of the original members of it was Alzheimer's Australia back then, a lovely, lovely girl from Tasmania, Di, I can't think of her last name, doesn't matter. But she said, we have a responsibility as people with dementia to actually share how it is while we still can, because otherwise, how can we expect people to support us in the way that we want and maybe need? So it's a really tough question.
We've had some.
Just having a.
I'll start from the top down. Kate, do you think that I don't know how to say this word. Kate, do you know how to say that word, Kate? Do you think that there's been a rapprochement with the general disability rights community? Have I said that word right?
Unfortunately, I can't remember if it is the right word. I can't remember what it means. Can you explain that more, Linda?
Okay, let's let Linda.
What I found in I'll talk a little bit while you maybe type in a bit more detail for me, Linda. But I was reading an article by maybe an article or a book by Susan Cahill, who's a prominent rights, dementia and rights academic in the UK somewhere. And in one of the articles I read, she said, she didn't really know why the dementia community hadn't tried to engage with the broader disability community. Well, I would say that we have at the highest levels, in fact, but the broader disability community are actually pretty much like the rest of the community. They don't understand that dementia causes disability, so they don't really quite see us fitting into their camp. So it's been, I think it's the only way forward, using a rights approach, but I'm not getting closer. I'm not sure we're getting closer, Linda. I don't really know about that, maybe a little bit. And certainly the research project that I just did with Associate Professor Linda Steele from University of Technology in Sydney on reparations for harm in residential aged care. That particular project, we did an Australian launch of our reports and an international launch, and that particular work has significant global interest, and because a lot of it was about rights, legal rights, human rights, disability rights. And we don't detain other people in locked, segregated settings other than criminals that I know of anywhere else in the world, but we do that to people with dementia. And, I can remember orphanages. When orphanages were being shut down around the world, the reason they were being shut down is that those institutional settings were basically the reason for all of the violations of, the harm, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse of orphans living in orphanages. And the same thing, people with intellectual and physical disabilities were once institutionalized. And guess what? They were abused as well. So we're a strange species, humans. We don't really learn from past harm. So here we are, building more institutions for people with dementia to live in nice, secure, locked, segregated units. And we know that it causes harm. And we've got multiple reports and royal commissions and God knows what else proving that they cause harm. And yet we keep doing it. So we are a strange species.
We are indeed. Tamas has written a lengthy one, so I'm going to read it. As always, great presentation. Thank you, Kate. I truly believe that we need to start educating people about dementia at a young age, but I can hardly see good examples for that. Last year, I talked to a person who is still in a position where he could encourage change, and he told me that it would be a long-term goal, but they have to focus on something that could deliver positive outcomes in a short period of time. What do you think of that?
I really believe in the intergenerational approach, Thomas, and there was a program here in Australia done on our National Australian Broadcasting Commission. I think it was on the ABC, called Linda, help! Oh, another Aussie in the room. Old people's homes for young people, or something like that. 4-year-olds, I can't remember what it was called, but it was this fantastic program. And small children were going in and visiting the residents living there, and doing activities with them and outings with them. And they've just had a teenager, another show of teenagers engaging with and working with, well, not working with, but being involved with people living in residential care, with really similar brilliant outcomes. Young people are missing grandparents because we all live, often we're living a long way away from each other. Grandparents are missing grandchildren because they're in a nursing home or they live too far away. So, it feeds into each other beautifully. But then there's that wonderful educative process between, intergenerational education. And usually young people don't feel any stigma. That's something that as we grow up, we start to develop things like stigma and discrimination and otherness, but we're not born with that. So it's not dementia that discriminates, it's people that do that. Another question, do I think dementia will move away from the current association with mental health? That's an interesting question, because in Australia, dementia comes under the umbrella of neurodegenerative disorders. In England, I believe it still comes under mental health, and I believe in most other countries it comes under the mental health umbrella. And at the WHO, it comes under the mental health umbrella. And in fact, Dementia Alliance International, a number of years ago now, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we campaigned with the WHO to move dementia out from underneath mental health and put it into neurocognitive disorders. And we actually were successful with that campaign. But we had the international geriatricians internationally campaigned against that. And the reason for that was it was too hard to say no to. If you live in a low and middle income country where they don't have neurologists, then if you've got a condition that's got a growing cohort of people, dementia is increasing. There's no medical specialist for them to see. If they can't see the psychiatrist because it's not a mental health condition, and there aren't any neurologists, then who do they see? So they kind of went into bat against the decision to move dementia from mental health. And I can remember in the early days I was an early adopter of seeing dementia symptoms as disabilities, and a lot of people with dementia pushed back against me on that. We don't want another negative D word. Dementia's bad enough to live with. And I can remember talking to some English friends, a group of maybe through DI, one of our support groups, saying, well, so would you rather be seen as, mentally ill or someone with a brain that's changing and changing capacity, that if we call those changes disabilities, you have legal rights to disability support. So that helped change the minds of people with dementia. But when you're newly diagnosed, you probably don't want to hear straight up that it is a disability or it causes disabilities. But you don't want to hear you've got cancer either, especially if it's an untreatable one. But we still tell people that they've got cancer. We still tell people that they might have, any other condition, even if prognosis is really awful. And, we know that a lot of people with dementia live quite long lives, not necessarily productively. A lot of people do take that prescription of disengagement. They give up living. And so they do hang around home and their friends disappear and they basically just wait to die. But if we can embrace dementia condition symptoms as disabilities, then we can embrace it, take it into the right space and join that movement more easily. But, I'm not ashamed to have had mental health issues. Why should I be? But unfortunately, there's a lot of stigma with mental health still. And, there's a lot of stigma with dementia as well.
Okay, I wonder if we spend the next few minutes or next 10 minutes or so just thinking about this. We talked about so many barriers, thinking about what actions we could take from this, or where, what steps can we take. Some of these things are massive. So moving dementia over in as a disability would have massive economic repercussions. Sorry. But if we thought about the small steps that we can take, there are things that we can all do around stigma. And we've got practitioners on, we've got people with lived experience on. What, if we start that sort of conversation around what we can do around some of these barriers, what do you think?
Well, if I own people with dementia, that's the first thing I would do. If I was the CEO of Dementia Australia, I would immediately start employing people with dementia. Why not? Nothing about us without us. And I've been an advocate. I am an advocate. Well, a bit more of an activist these days. But isn't it unfair that you wouldn't pay people? And if we didn't have such a welfare state kind of attitude to people with dementia who were working and then are told that they have to leave work, and we're given this advice with the best of intentions by healthcare professionals usually, and sometimes by aged care organisations and others around us, that you will need to give up work, you will need to give up. Loss of hope, learned helplessness. How about we re-empower people to get back to living? And that's one of the things that DAI has done, which has also been one of its biggest struggles. And when people used to come to DAI, Dementia Alliance International, people with dementia, and I've had this happen the last few weeks, new people are joining, there's quite a lot joining at the moment, and they often say at the end of their first support group, oh my God, that's the first time I've laughed and smiled since my diagnosis. It's the first time I've felt any hope. And so DAI has helped give people some hope to get back to living. And when they used to leave DAI to get back to living, we saw it as a failure. Actually, it's a success, because let's forget COVID's been in there in the way. Most people would prefer face-to-face engagement, not on Zoom. So if someone's feeling like they can get back to living and they can go to a local support group, or like Jerry Wiley in the States set up his own local support group with 4 people. They now have about 40 people turn up. His church supported that. That's a success story. Jerry was vice chair of DAI and he went on to set up a group in his own community and to find funding for that. But if I owned a dementia charity or an aged care service, I would be employing people with dementia. First thing to do, first thing to knock dementia stigma on the head is to start employing us again.
Brilliant. Thomas, I was just thinking, I worked, and it links in with that point. So one of my jobs that I did with Age UK Salford first was working alongside somebody with dementia, and we worked on this project. So Joy Watson, Kate, you probably know.
Yeah.
Developed this little character, Mr. Alzheimer's. So we collectively wrote it into a book, got it published, took it into schools. The schools had the books, they had the little teddy bears. So it was a really, really lovely project. For about 4 years, we were out working in the schools doing it. Then COVID hit.
Yeah.
Oh, Linda says DAI saved us, Kate. And Linda had also said it all comes back to ableism, in my opinion. IMO. I had to just work that out. I was like,
yes, yeah, that one I still remember. Sometimes I remember the acronym and sort of what they mean, but I can't remember the words of. There's another one that Linda uses. It's longer. It's got an I in it, and I can never know what that means. I always have to look it up, Linda. But I think ableism does have a lot to do with it. But we're really, there's quite a big movement in the disability community to stop the slave labor of people with intellectual disabilities, for example. And we've had like sheltered workshops in Australia employing people with intellectual disabilities, paying them 50 cents an hour or $1 an hour. That's slave labor, absolutely. But to have advocates putting in 40 hours a week for nothing, now that's beyond slave labor, surely. And if they have the capacity and an organisation's got the funding to support them to do that, well, they should be supporting them as employed staff. And I know that will impact people who might be on a disability pension or have other, but wouldn't you want to be gainfully employed and give that up? And then when dementia progresses, because we can't forget that living and being engaged and even things like all the rehab I do, that is not a cure. I still am, unfortunately, progressing slower than expected. But I mentioned to you, Emma, before everybody else joined the webinar room, some nights now I can't speak or I slur my words, you can't understand me. Does that mean I should give up completely? No, it just means I need some extra support sometimes. And I suppose I do dread the day when that might become permanent and I can't communicate well at all. But, I'll get my sense of humour out and get Harpo Marx's horn, because that's what I'm going to do. Harpo Marx from the Marx Brothers.
And Kate, you just missed out the fact that you've started a PhD again. I know you mentioned it earlier, but you're absolutely in the daytime consumed in the world of a PhD. And
part-time, only part-time.
Part-time, I know, but part-time PhD is not like it's not a walk in the park, is it?
I really did it for two reasons. I did it because I wanted to push my brain hard, really hard, and that new learning thing. And the neuroplasticity. In fact, my husband thinks that in some aspects of my cognition, I've been sharper than I've been for ages. But I also have felt, and I would have expressed this the last time we were in conversation, I have felt like the advocacy, the style of the approach that I've taken and that many other people have taken, whilst it's not done nothing, I just feel like it's not serving my goals for real change. And whenever, I think that my litmus test for success as an activist is a tiny little one, but clearly it's not, because I've only met one person in 15 years with dementia who wasn't told to go home and get ready to die. Different words, but same advice. One person in 15 years. So that's my litmus test. I want to turn up to a DAI support group, and I host a USA one early on a Friday morning, and I've come back to co-hosting an Aussie one with Eileen, who I think is online tonight, on a Monday afternoon. I want to meet somebody. Actually, I want to meet every new person that I meet, newly diagnosed. I want them to say, my doctor said that I shouldn't give up work, that I should get disability support, that I should be sent to rehabilitation, the same as I would if I had a stroke. That's what I want to hear. It doesn't seem much to ask, but clearly it has been way too much to expect. I used to go into about language. Still read articles, the dementia sufferers and victim of the disease. That hasn't gone away. That's decades of advocacy for language change, and we're nowhere near that yet.
Yeah, I can't. forgotten how many conferences I've been to where you get a politician coming in, flown in, or coming in for a 10-minute presentation, and they use the word suffer, and then everybody with dementia are up in this up, they're shouting, we're not suffering, and it's just reinforced by the media.
And we still have academics calling us demented and sufferers. And I remember talking to a university, one of the universities in Australia, about some courses they run, and said, look, you use the word sufferer a lot in this course. Have you not thought to use the Dementia Australia language guidelines? And the academic said to me, they're only guidelines, we don't have to use them. So that's kind of the attitude. And, of course I suffer some of the time, but I suffered some of the time before dementia. I've got friends that have got other terminal illnesses, and they get sick of the suffering narrative too, so-and-so who's suffering from motor neurone disease, or suffering, or, and then on the TV, they lost the battle with cancer, as if it's a fight, as if by losing you've failed as a human being. So that, language has a lot to do with stigma as well, of course. It has to.
I was actually thinking of cancer as a more positive description, because you never get people as suffering with cancer, you get they're fighting cancer. So it's a different tone, isn't it? In my head, it's more positive.
In the media here, they often refer to a sufferer still, in the media here at least. Yeah.
We've got another question.
But, the other challenge, of course. What was the next question? Sorry.
Do you believe that implementing and standardizing a dementia screening test would diminish the disease's stigma?
Well, I have actually been on that. I've advocated for that for a long, long time. There was a group of people with dementia in Dementia Australia probably 10 or 12 years ago talking about that. And I don't know whether it would change stigma, but it might improve access to healthcare and more timely diagnosis. I guess it might also lead to false diagnosis. But we quite happily have our blood pressure checked. We quite happily have bloods taken. Those of us who go to the doctor for, a checkup every year before we get sick. I go more often than that now. We have bloods taken to check for diabetes, to check our liver, to check what's wrong with having our cognition checked. And, I think people who don't want that, it's due to stigma, surely. And I don't know, it's an interesting story. I think we have an abnormal obsession with cognitive capacity as a species. And, I've talked to someone who I'm a legal guardian for, and, whatever you're called when you got the power of attorney, when you can say they have a car accident and end up on life support, whatever that power is, I've got that for this person. And we were having a discussion about it a couple of years ago, and the person said, well, if my body's okay, but my brain's not working, let me die. If my brain's working, but I'm a quadriplegic, still let me live. So that, obsession with cognitive capacity as a species is, I don't know, I suppose I was like that once too, maybe.
Is it the fear that people have? And it's obviously reinforced by stigma and what we read and what we watch, but that fear that we're going to lose that cognition, that control.
There is fear, like having dementia. I can say that from a place of knowing. It's definitely, I have had times where I can't remember my husband's name. I meet people out that I find out later, I had no idea who I was talking to. And I kind of a bit of a weird theory of where confabulation comes from. So anyone who works in dementia will know that term. Is, we make up all these stories. I think it starts early, because I sometimes you know, the fake it till you make it. Well, you often don't make it, but I just pretend I know people now. You know, I met a girl I hadn't seen for years, apparently, in a post office recently, and she started chatting. You know, I was in the COVID queue, 1.5 meters apart. She started chatting to me, and I'm like, who the hell's this? And I eventually I said to her, look, I'm really sorry, but do I know you? And she went, yeah, we used to nurse together. Blah, blah, blah. And I went, in the end, I just pretended to know her. Because, you know, you want to save face, I suppose. It's challenging stuff to live with. So I can understand why people would be fearful of it too. And losing the ability to recall memories, to recall parts of your own identity. You know, my young friend who went into a nursing home at 54, he used to, the stories he would talk about, if you didn't know him really well, and the staff used to say, he's just like rambling, he just doesn't make sense. But I could pick up bits of his life within one story because I knew him really well. But he put them all together. He couldn't remember the whole story of each part of his life. But he remembered little bits and he just tied them all together as if they were one truth. But, you know, should we fear it? I don't know. Should we fear death? I don't know. We're all going to die. That's the only thing I know for sure, is every single person in the Zoom room today will die one day. Yeah. Could be tomorrow, could be tonight, could be in 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's a whole nother webinar, thinking about death, and we have done a few ones around death. I just wanted, we've got 5 minutes left, and Linda's put something on here, and I think it's really valid to discuss now, if we can, in the last few minutes. Sure. She says, we'll get there. We have to get rid of the medical model of disability.
Have to get rid of the biomedical model of dementia too. Yeah, I agree with you, Linda. I don't know how to do it. I've been trying to get disability into dementia land for a long, long time and failed miserably. So all I can do in that space is to use my own disability support and encourage other people with dementia to do the same as you would if you had a back injury and you didn't have dementia. Same thing.
Okay, we are in our last few minutes, so if you have any comments that you want to say, we've lost a few people. They've all said thank you so much, Kate. They found it really interesting and fascinating. I, of course, think we should do more of these webinars, Kate, because they're just so fantastic. And as you're doing a PhD now, oh, wait a minute, you haven't failed ATE. Oh, Linda, what? ATA.
Where's that question? Is that in the chat?
It just popped up and then it disappeared again.
Anyway, I sometimes do feel like I fail. I know I failed. I haven't. I've done my best. That's absolutely all I've done. And that's all any of us can do. And I quite like rocking the boat. I find I think that's the only way we'll really ever get there, is to keep rocking the boat. And sometimes that goes against what other dementia self-advocates think, but that's okay. You know, we don't all wear the same colour clothes. We don't all wear the same food, and the type of advocacy that I did, I used to think was the right way. I don't anymore. It doesn't mean it's not right for other people. So I think it's about respect and kindness and just accepting each other, that we're all doing the best that we can.
Definitely. Linda has cleared up the ATE. It wasn't an acronym, it was Kate. Oh. You haven't failed, Kate. I'm glad that's your fault, Linda, for using too many acronyms. We're like, ATE.
We thought it was an acronym. I love it. Thank you, Linda. Well, I haven't created enough change, and I mean, I'm greedy. I wanted it all, and I wanted it before now. But you know, the fact that the World Health Organization at some stage we'll be launching their dementia and rehabilitation guidelines. That's a big win, and that is something that I've pushed really hard for. And I'm working on a project with a group of researchers in Australia on dementia and rehabilitation, and trying to implement it into primary healthcare networks. So, you know, it's I suppose a step at a step. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's all you can do.
It is, and it is so huge. And you know, you've gone back to do your PhD. You've like had to think about it and thought, actually, I'm going to focus in on this area. I'm doing my PhD, and you're going to be shouting around the results of that PhD, Kate. So
yeah, even if they're awful results and don't come up to what I think, it doesn't matter. You know, I rewatched that movie about Stephen Hawking recently, and like some of the hypotheses and theories I've had, I'd be really happy if people prove me right or wrong. But you know, I don't like being yelled at, told I'm wrong. I'm happy for people to prove it, though. In fact, I'll be happy to prove myself wrong, because that might lead us to a better way. You know, if you do your shoelaces up a certain way and you always fall over, you sooner or later you learn to do them up a different way. So yeah, so you could talk about it for forever, actually.
We could. We've just had a lovely comment in there. So loads of people have said really thought-provoking. Thanks, Rebecca. But Jeff, I can't get to it now. Jeff has just said he doesn't feel alone. He's come to the talk late, and listening to you, he doesn't feel alone.
Oh, that's great. I went to a webinar last week on it was really in the about decarceration, and was more focused on Negro Americans in the USA. It wasn't really a global conversation, but it was incredibly relevant to the work that I'm doing now. And that was the thing I said in that webinar last week. Thank you for not making me feel alone. You know, there are other people out there, and I often do feel really alone because I've taken such a different tangent to the way I used to campaign for change, and it's okay to be different.
It is okay to be different. We have reached our time. Kate, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you everyone who's come along to watch, and you've actively participated and put comments in and questions. Kate, I feel like we should at some point come back for another webinar, but whenever you're ready, I'm always ready.
Down the track. Yeah. It's terrific. Lovely of everyone to be here this morning and tonight.
All right. Have a relaxing evening, and
thanks, Emma.
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.